Registry Matters is an independent production. The opinions and ideas here are that of the hosts and do not reflect the opinions of any other organization. If you have a problem with these thoughts, FYP. Recording live from FYP Studios East and West, transmitting across the internet. This is episode 116 of Registry Matters. Saturday night again, Larry. How are you? I don't know how your weather was, but it's awfully bright outside for being Saturday night.
It's very bright outside, and I'm thinking maybe it might not even be Saturday, but I'm not sure.
Wait a minute. What day is it?
I'm thinking it may be Sunday.
Oh, crap. You're right. Sunday afternoon. Well, we're a day late and a dollar short, I think is how that expression goes. How are you?
Fantastic. I'm ready for a spectacular episode of Registry Matters.
I really like doing the podcast, Larry. Just saying.
I think we should do it every day.
You want to start doing a daily podcast?
Let's do it.
Wow. Hey, we have a gigantic amount of content to cover. It's all over the map, and I would like to begin with a voicemail. It's a two-parter. Our super patron Mike out of Florida has got a comment, and then he's also got a question for you. So put your ears on, Larry, and let me know what you think.
Hey guys, this is Mike from down in Central Florida, one of your long-term patrons. Wanted to take a minute, leave a message, and tell you guys how much I really appreciate the podcast. The production value of it has gone up exponentially. It sounds amazing these days. I appreciate the work that you put into it, the organization of the whole thing. It really sounds professional and adds a lot of credibility to this movement. And I also had a little comment for Larry. I really appreciate the way that you put the real life expectations of these things that are happening in the different circuit courts, and none of us need any false hope. And I like the way you give it to us exactly the way it is, and no fluff. And that's what we need. We need to know what's going on in a language that we can understand. So I really appreciate that about how Larry, will break it down for us and explain it to us. And it's not something that's giving anybody false hope. We exactly know what's going on and can set a real expectation for that. So I appreciate that. And lastly, I do have a question for Larry. I'm wondering that with the changes that are going on in the future, and I know you can't predict the future, but the things like what's happening in Michigan and some of the lawsuits that are going on in other places like New Mexico, and I know there's a big one in Florida. Once these things start to change, for example, if things loosen up and lax on certain registrants up in Michigan, for example, do you think if the Senate legislates a new registry, they will make a provision to keep people from other states, from flooding into that area to try to, avoid the registry, which I can't say I wouldn't do the same thing if I was close enough to it. But anyway, do you think they'll do something like that, or do you think they'll just, let it go? I can't imagine that they wouldn't try to make some sort of provision. But that's my question. Great podcast. You guys are awesome. Keep up the good work.
Thank you for that, Mike. And hey, I appreciate those compliments about the production quality, because I am all about making it sound awesome. You
are.
I try.
We appreciate that. That was a very, very nice comment. I will be sending a check to Mike.
But what about them doing something along the line? Well, let's first address the part about Larry, you do have a tendency to not really sugarcoat it and tell us from all of your hundreds of years of experience with legislatures, including all the way back to Greece. But you look at it from just not from a legal point of view, but also from a political point of view.
I do indeed, and I think that he's really understanding what's going on here. That there is a trend, and like for example, we're going to have a column from syndicated columnist Diane Diamond pop up here later, and for her to take the position that she took, that it's time to reduce the bloated registries. I do see a trend from all this litigation where lawmakers are beginning to have the opportunity to feel some protection, which is what they need. They need protection from the angry mob. They need Judge Persky. You remember the angry mob that
was
removed him from
Brock
office?
Turner, right?
Yes. the court rulings, the cumulative effect of the court rulings the lawmakers will be able to say, I wish I could, but we can't. Now, whether or not they truly wish they could, that's only something you will know from a personal relationship from them. But they feel the need to say that they wish they could because they've got the angry mob staring at them saying, why don't you? And that's the position that they're in. And as I try to say over and over again, it's kind of like ISB versus the way it should be. Versus ISB. The people that hold offices, by and large, do not decide public opinion. They can contribute to public opinion in some ways. If you have a really charismatic leader who's really persuasive, they can possibly move public opinion. But public opinion usually is the other way around. The people we elect are responding to public opinion. They're not creating public opinion. I know we're going to get some comments that disagree with that. But when they go out and grandstand and they give a press conference that something ought to be done about something, it's because public opinion, they're sensing with their finger in the wind that that's where public opinion is. And they're not making that public opinion. They've learned this public opinion from door knocking, from community functions, from emails, from phone calls, and they've heard this from the people that they're representing that have communicated with them. This is what they believe their constituents want. And what are they supposed to do in a representative republic? Are they supposed to flip the middle finger and say, well, don't really care what you want?
We did vote them to represent us, and if we want something that makes no sense, is ineffective, that's irrelevant, isn't it?
Well, theoretically, if we don't like what we're getting, we would change who we're electing.
Well, no, but I mean it from the side of like the angry mob, so to speak. The angry mob wants these registration laws, regardless of whether they're effective or not. It makes them feel better, and the representative has done what they've requested that person to do, him or her. So it's what we got.
That is correct. That's what we've got. And the public opinion, in my view, and I have a lot of years of experience, I believe that public opinion drives I don't believe it's the other way around. I do not believe that lawmakers make public opinion. The fact of the matter is, if you look at the major issues of the day, what changed same-sex marriage? Was it the lawmakers or was it public opinion?
It's just a groundswell of support in a reasonably short period of time that changed and forced the hand. And
in fact, some of the people that held political office, particularly on the conservative side, did everything they could to keep public opinion from winning the day. They went to court, and they fought all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court on that issue. But public opinion ultimately prevailed. Public opinion will prevail on every single issue in a representative republic if that public opinion is heard loud enough. When we no longer want to be the incarceration capital of the world, we will no longer be the incarceration of capital of the world, because public opinion will demand that we stop doing it. And the representatives and senators will respond accordingly. It will take some time. It will be painful, and people will not want to give up their cushy jobs that work in the prison corrections industrial complex. But we could move in another direction. But to the second component of his question, I would be very surprised if Michigan didn't try to figure out a way to close the floodgate, because the way it looks to me, and this is a good chance to plug the NARSL in Action, which is a week from Monday night, March 2nd. We're going to have a segment on a 3-hour NARSL in Action program. One segment is going to be devoted to Michigan, and we're going to have Miriam Alkerman, who's the ACLU attorney, one of the primary movers of this case. We're going to have her on. But I would be very surprised if they didn't try to close the floodgate, because the way I read the decision, there's nothing that would prevent a person who has a conviction, a conduct that occurred prior to 2011, from going to Michigan and saying, I don't have to register anymore, assuming that they don't enact a new modified version of registration. And they're not going to want that. They're just not going to be able to tolerate that politically. I mean, the bordering states would be the first. If you lived in a border state, that'd be the first place you'd want to go to. So people in Michigan are not going to want sex offenders from other states coming there. I don't make that rule. I'm just telling you that's the way that the population of Michigan is going to look at that, and they're going to put enormous pressure on their representatives to not let that happen.
And so they could put some sort of wording in there that if you've been convicted of a crime in another state, then you're going to register here.
Well, they'd probably have to be a little more creative than that. They would probably come up with something along the lines of if you're that this ruling, they would probably try to put in statute that this ruling will apply to anyone who was residing in Michigan and had an obligation to register in Michigan at that time, because then they could credibly argue that it's not ex post facto because you don't benefit from the ruling, you weren't here.
Okay.
And now that doesn't mean that you couldn't bring another case and say, well, there's an equal protection issue here. And I'm not saying that you couldn't bring another viable cause of action, but that doesn't close the door to the lawmakers trying to do what they can to keep the floodgate from opening. And that's what I would expect that they would do, to try to come up with something that would close what they would see as a potential floodgate. And it doesn't matter whether it's tens of thousands or whether it's 160. It doesn't matter, because the people. I think we've gone back to the Nebraska case, a situation where that they passed a law a decade ago where you could drop off a kid if you didn't want to take care of it without any fear of prosecution, that they were become a safe haven because they love kids so much that they wanted to provide people an opportunity to get that child the help. So you could drop a kid off at a hospital or at any safe haven, no questions asked. And when the kids started being dropped off, there were some a little bit older. They weren't so cute and cuddly. They were like problem kids that were teenage adolescents. They were all
like little cute puppies.
And when they had a handful of kids that were dropped off as adolescents, all of a sudden they did a quick repeal of that, because Nebraska didn't feel like they could become the haven for everybody who had a problem child that they couldn't care for. Oh, well, we'll just drive across and drop them off over here in Omaha. That's a good place to get rid of them. And we don't have any potential liability for the kid anymore. And they repealed that. If you're not going to let cuddly kids be dropped off in your state, who by most accounts, most people like children, if you're going to close that floodgate, it only stands to reason, if I apply my political experience looking back on history, that you're not going to let people on the sex offender registry come cascading into your state. That's the way I would expect it to go down.
And even so, this all went over my head because I'm not quite so smart. But Josh is under the impression, and nothing against Josh. Josh is under the opinion that, like, there's not going to be a way for the legislature to finagle their way around this and try and enact something new. That's my interpretation of the conversation that went down over the last couple of weeks.
I don't share his.
I get that, but I mean, isn't that sort of like, super short characterization of what he was saying?
It did sound like that was his view, but if they,
and I know you don't share that, and I don't question either one of you, because you both are incredibly smart, and I don't know where I can even stand. I certainly side with you from the logic and rationale side, but I can't really contest his side because he's wickedly smart too.
Well, it would seem like to me that if you looked at Smith versus Doe and you had a registry like that passed constitutional muster. That's not what Michigan has currently. But Michigan, all previous challenges to Michigan's registry had failed, because until 2006 and 2011, when they added those provisions, it was viewed as a civil regulatory scheme. So I don't know why in the world, what would make it impossible to peel off? You would have to draft a new registry, and you would have to do some work at it, because apparently, if you just struck the words of the 2006 and 11 amendments, you would have nothing but gibberish. So you'd have to draft a new law. But I don't know what would preclude them from doing that. I can't figure out what would preclude them from passing a new law and making a very benign registry, which would meet the constitutional challenge. All registries are not unconstitutional. I don't know how many times I've said that on the podcast through the two plus years. The mere act of registering someone in and of itself is not unconstitutional.
We could conceivably, maybe word for word, I don't know if that works today, but the 2003 Alaska registry, like, somebody could put that in place, and it has, your words are, I believe, disabilities and restraints. It doesn't impose anything significant by just having to go visit the Popo annually and do whatever they were doing. Like, that's not that big a deal if they don't add all the restrictions and all the other garbage on top of it. Like, It would be moderately inconvenient, but I don't think it would be much more than that.
Well, I would say that if you can look at New York, I know we've got a listener on right now that there was an immense amount of resources a few years ago put into challenging New York's registry, where you have to go in like every 3 years,
right?
To have a picture made, and you mail in forms, and the case was being appealed, and Professor Carpenter from California, I forget which law school she's at, but she contacted NARSL, and we jointly looked at the case, and Professor Carpenter saw the same thing I did, is that appeal was not likely to succeed because there wasn't enough disabilities or restraints. The mere fact that you have to mail in a form is not punishment. And the appeal was unsuccessful. The challenge was unsuccessful. And in fact, New York went back after, I think they've extended their registry at least once, maybe twice, because after the first 10 years, originally you were going to get out after 10 years, and they went back and said, well, we want you to be on another 10 years. Well, as long as it was a civil regulatory scheme, they were able to extend the period an additional 10 years. It's quite obvious that you can have a registry that isn't unconstitutional. I do not advocate for them, nor does NARSL. But you could do it. The question to what we're having the discussion about is whether or not it can constitutionally be done. The question we're not discussing is whether it should be done.
Yeah.
If you want to discuss that, it shouldn't be done. There's no debate about that. When people pay their debt to society, they should be free to go on with their life, and they shouldn't have any accountability until they break the law again. I can't make it any clearer than that. But that's not what we're discussing. We're discussing whether Michigan could enact a constitutional registry. Yes, they could.
But it wouldn't be popular by the people.
Well, it would be more popular than having nothing at all. If they're faced with having to enact a less draconian registry or let these people go, then they have the political cover. They can say, if it wasn't for that damn federal judiciary, thank God we got President Trump putting good law and order justices on. But if it weren't for these lifetime appointees who are accountable to nobody, we would have a tougher registry. But this is the best we can do, and we wish we could do more. That's what they will likely do, is they'll blame the courts and say this is all we can do, and then they'll probably test the boundaries and try to do more than what they should do, and there could be additional challenges forthcoming.
I do understand. Now that we beat that dead horse, we should move on to cover some articles of the day.
Well, we've only got 20. We've only got 27 articles in here.
Sorry. I miscounted. So this first one comes from the New York Times opinion section. Let Bernie Madoff and many more out of prison. Bernie Madoff is a pretty poopy person, in my personal opinion. He actually started his little, his whole situation came down like right when I was first entering into the system, and being of similar religious heritage and culture and all that stuff. It was really crappy the way that he embezzled a Ponzi scheme, just untold gajillions of dollars, and not really a very popular person in my opinion. But he is now ancient. He's almost your age, and he's got like stage 75 kidney failure, and we are going to spend a bunch of money trying to keep him alive so he can serve as much of a prison sentence as we can possibly muster while he continues to deteriorate in prison. And he has petitioned, I think under the First Step Act, to have some level of compassionate release, and I don't think it's going to go through.
Those petitions rarely do. The provision exists to let people out, and most states, or I should say most, I don't know that to be a fact. I know many states have such a provision in their law, but it becomes very difficult to actually. Can you imagine the uproar that would happen? This individual was responsible for bilking a lot of investors out of an awful lot of money, and I know it's only money, but money that could play an important role in their financial security for health care for their children, and he was a sad character, and the anger has not subsided even after all these years in prison, because the very little restitution was had by the people who were victimized, and they want him to suffer, and they want him to die in prison, and that's difficult to overcome. It really is. So I would agree with you. I would not expect him to be released.
They say that he has he's entering the final stages of kidney disease and has less than 18 months to live. He milked $17 billion from investors. And the part that bothered me the most, I suppose, is that there were philanthropies that had money invested through his funding efforts, investment strategies. And he was reporting like 20% kind of things per year. And these things then just like evaporated. They were crushed because the money was never really there. Anyway, I know that we're not talking about the crime that he did. I just wanted to highlight those things. And, but yeah, how much money do you think that we're going to spend for this guy to be in prison versus the damage done? I mean, it never accounts for it, but like our only purpose for leaving him there is to just like stick the screws in him and say, you're being punished more and more and more.
That is correct. But if you look at the article, the Bureau of Prisons denied his petition, as it does 94% of those filed by incarcerated people under that provision. And again, I wish it wasn't 94%, but the reality is that the mob won't tolerate the releases, and the political pressure is applied if you dare release someone. And we're going to get into some pardons and some commutations later, but there's usually a lot of political pressure applied, and I would imagine that the Bureau of Prisons, there's just no way that they can let this guy out. It would require executive intervention, someone who actually has the cover. The president could intervene, and it would be okay. But for a bureaucrat to do this, I just don't see it happen.
Coming over from Lex 18, and we have a couple collateral articles that go with it too, about Marsy's Law. This is a measure that's passing almost all across the country. These are either bills being introduced or these are actual constitutional amendments that are giving victims more rights to know about the person that committed their crime against them, so that they know when they're being released. I think they even have a stake at the table of whether the person is released or not. And it took me a very long time to even digest this, Larry, and understand this, that as far as when you see the docket, whatever the term is, it says the state versus John Smith, whatever that person's name is. But it is not the victim versus the person that perpetrated the alleged perpetrator of the crime. So the victim is a cog in the wheel. They're a piece of evidence, their testimony, they are physical evidence. Why would you then bring them to the forefront to be like an advisor in the whole process of letting someone out of prison after they've done their 5, 10, 20 years, whatever that time is?
Well, you wouldn't if you were reacting rationally, but what's happening is an irrational debate that's being driven by the victim industrial complex, and it has become a complex, lots of money, a lot of effort has been put into creating these advocates for victims' rights, and we've kind of lost sight of the crime is against the people. It's not against the person, and I think I got an ugly email about this when I said about it, that it's the people who made the rules of an organized society, and it's us, we the people, who decided where those boundaries are, and in order so that we don't have people's eyeballs being extracted, and we don't have vigilante justice being administered, we've developed an orderly system that's supposed to be somewhat neutral and objective in terms of what is the proportional punishment and what is proper for balancing the needs of an orderly society. Well, the victims are not happy with that. They feel like that when you come home, and if it's a property crime or if it's a violent crime against you as a person, your emotion takes over, which is what the system is designed to keep from entering into it, because you're angry at the person, and rightfully so. But the victims should not be anything more than a witness at the table. They should not decide whether you get a harsh sentence or not. I don't think that I agree with asking the victim what's an appropriate sentence. It cuts both ways. I know sometimes the victim wants a lesser sentence than what the state would be. That's a rarity, but it does happen. But I do not believe that it's proper for, if the states want to offer a plea agreement that is probation and the victim says no, when a prosecutor says, well, I would have offered probation, but the victim wouldn't have any part of it. Probation may be the appropriate remedy for that. So I'm greatly consternated over all this stuff where we're enshrining in the Constitution requirements that victims be given a role that's not properly theirs, and they're not properly equipped, nor should they be making these decisions.
I suppose if you went to your local Applebee's and you demanded to be part of the cooking process, we should just elect you to be master chef over your dinner at Applebee's because you said you wanted to be. Because you're an eater at the restaurant, therefore you're an expert on the cooking of it.
Well, I guess that's a somewhat of an example.
It may not be the bestest one, but it's the bestest one that I could come up with as we are speaking. We had a couple other articles from Courthouse News and the Courier Journal all talking about the measure. And, you know, it's funny, when I was reading one of the articles, I want to say that North Carolina already has victims' rights in their constitution. So this gives them rights-er in their constitution.
Well, it's scary to me, but I'm on the defense side of this, so it worries me when the careful balance that was created in our justice system is being continuously eroded where there is no balance. And we're going to hear a former governor in a clip here shortly say that he didn't realize. That's surprising to me. He didn't realize it, but he didn't realize how bad the system. And we're still headed in the wrong direction. These things are moving us in the wrong direction, not the right direction.
And some of the other articles were talking about how this breaks down due process. Can you delve into what the problem on the due process side is of this?
Well, the particulars of Marcy's law varies according to what they're proposing in each situation. But due process is being continuously eroded by victims, because the one thing that bothers me the most is that they are demanding to be entitled to be believed as if something that they say is magically so. And they're entitled, and they're demanding not to be confronted by strict and aggressive questioning about their motives and about why they're making the accusations. All that erodes due process. And then when you look at on the backside of it, after you've paid your debt to society and you're ready to be released, well, guess what? We have to notify the victims. We have to ask them what they would think about if you were to be released. Oh, you've been in prison for 7.5 years. Now you've been a model prisoner, but the victims need to be at the table. Really? How are they?
There are a bunch of like video clips where they show some dude stalking some woman. You know, here's the person that spent 10 years in prison for, you know, assaulting you, whatever. And the woman's like freaking out, scared to death, which is totally legit. But I'm assuming we could make some kind of law that after I know you're going to say after the person has finished their sentence, they shouldn't have any disabilities restraints. But while they're under some kind of supervision, I'm assuming the judge could say, hey, you can't be in proximity of this person. The person is immediately breaking some kind of rule, regulation, whatever, that they are in the wrong place, and they could then go back inside the box.
Well, people that are in prison magically don't become nice people just by mere fact of being in prison. If they did, we would have the safest country that could ever be imagined, because we incarcerate so many of our people, they would magically become nice. So, of course, people in prison who have been put there for doing bad things sometimes continue to succeed in doing bad things while they're in prison. That's obvious. But we have laws against that. So if the person serves their debt to society and they really are released from prison and they commence a pattern of stalking or harassing a prior victim, we can do what we do with other people. We can intervene again, right?
Yeah, even post, if the person says, hey, this person is stalking me, I saw him watching me here, his car is parked outside there, then you've then broken another law and you go in front of the judge and you have some prior history, then they're going to put the hammer down on you harder, I would assume.
Well, of course, there's the extreme case where a person who had not been rehabilitated would come out of prison and not only stalk, but actually do an act of violence. And then the person who said, well, had they not been early released, they would not have been able to do. And you're absolutely correct. If we never release a person, we will keep their recidivism rate down to absolute zero. I can assure you that their free world recidivism rate would be zero. Can't tell you about the recidivism rate inside behind the walls, but we could do that. But the question for society is that the wisest use of our resources to incarcerate a person indefinitely who might do something at some point in the future after they've been punished appropriately. And that is just not the country I want to live in, where we incarcerate people for what they might do. We incarcerate people for what they do.
I do understand. We are going to move over to an article that you put in here like 10 minutes ago, always throwing me curveballs, Larry. But it is from the Albuquerque Journal. And this is a syndicated column by Diane Diamond. And she is all about our bloated sex offender registry and shutting that whole thing down and saying it's time to reform them and reduce the number of people that they have on them and so forth.
I thought it was a great column. I put it in because she really piggybacked off of the Michigan decision, and she talked about the Judge Robert Cleland, which we spent a lot of time on last week and the week before. And she indicates that the registries have become bloated, and she points out many of the problems of the current versions of registration. And she even points out some of the people on the registry that you wouldn't imagine. Like she said, in 2002, a woman in Georgia was convicted of a sexual offense for allowing her 15-year-old daughter to have sex in their home. When you hear the sex offender registry, the average citizen thinks of something very vile, a person who's done something very, very heinous. So she illuminates that the registry, teenage boys caught up with high school girls, she's got that in there, and it's an illumination. Again, this helps the politician have cover because Diane Diamond is carried in a whole lot of newspapers across the country, and a lot of elected officials are reading this that didn't even know anything about the Michigan case. They now know about the Michigan case. They know about the excesses of the registry. And they can say, well, everybody knows this because, it was in the Journal yesterday. And she did use some terms that we don't like, thrown around, predator and pedophile. But all in all, it's a fantastic column, so I would encourage people to read it if they haven't already seen it in their local newspaper.
You can certainly find that in our show notes.
You imagine being shackled to a gurney during delivery because they're concerned about you escaping? That's a barbaric practice that should be banned.
So this next article comes from Palmetto Politics, the Post and Courier, and this is from Charleston, South Carolina. South Carolina lawmakers consider measure to end shackling pregnant inmates. This one bothers me so very bad. I can't imagine a woman who's 11 to 5 months pregnant with this freaking a bowling ball hanging out from her tummy. She's like broken her water and screaming in agony, and they're going to be like, nope, sorry, we got to put the irons on you so you don't run away or don't hurt anybody while you're popping out the baby. I'm baffled by this practice, and it really bothers me.
It bothers me indeed, and laws are being passed, have been passed, and are being passed to prohibit this. And it's sad that we have to pass a law because of the inhumane officers that would order such a thing. And I know they say, I'm just following my department's policy. All prisoners, if I take a prisoner to the hospital, I have to, the department requires that. So they get to pass the buck and say, well, if it weren't department policy, I wouldn't be doing it, but this is what I'm obligated to do. But to South Carolina's credit, apparently the State Department of Corrections has long since abandoned this, and they've got a policy against it. It says that this is just something that's being done because of local of correctional facilities that are not under state corrections to control. But why would you need a law? Really? Why would you have to have a law to encourage you not to do this? Isn't it the humane thing to do?
Isn't that almost where this all falls down, is that when left to the discretion of the individual, that they don't know what is appropriate necessarily, so now you have to give them further guidance. This seems almost like the nanny state that everyone rails against, where we would like local control over these things. Oh, wait, somebody has effed that up beyond all measure, so we need to put in a law so that there's no confusion about them having their own local discretion.
Well, I guess that's the way I would look at it, that local discretion is not always the best. But I just don't understand what kind of human being would want to do that.
I know, right?
And
I'm sure there was some psycho woman doing this, and forgive me, I'm not trying to attack women, but there's some crazy woman out there, whether she is like she is actually born bad, or in the fit of all of the stress and trauma of having a baby, that she got some violent and scratched someone or actually tried to escape. I don't know. And I'm sure that there is an example out there of someone doing something terrible while dropping a kid off, but it doesn't seem like anywhere near any level of majority, any level of like a statistically significant number of people would be trying to do heinous things while they're dropping a kid off.
Well, again, of course, there's always that saber-toothed tiger that where there's a phenomenal superhuman. Since I have not been pregnant, I can't attest to what it does to the body, what it does to the energy level, and any of that stuff. But I'm guessing from what little I do know that all the coordination of all your muscles would be necessary to help deliver that baby. And having a person shackled and chained, and it seems like that would interfere with the movements that you would need to exert maximum participation in the delivery. But I just don't.
Maximum participation. You have such political words for things, Larry. It always cracks me up.
I don't know how a human being could sit there and watch a woman shackled trying to give birth and be proud of themselves. Yeah. At the very minimum, you'd go back to your sheriff and say, "Boss, I'm telling you, I did this today. I'm not going to do this again. This is a ridiculous policy. You need to abolish it." Every inmate that we take to a hospital setting doesn't need to be shackled, and we need to have officer discretion, and that's the way it needs to be. Grow a little between your legs and go in and tell them this is wrong.
But then the sheriff says, "Hey, you're going to shackle everyone when you go do your job, and that, like, when you take someone to the hospital, you're going to shackle them. I don't care if they're missing limbs, shackle the missing limbs together."
And you say, "Well, that's nice. I appreciate your input, but I'm going to do it my way." And have the courage. If you're a good officer, as far as I know, there's great officer shortages around the country. I hear departments are begging for officers for lateral transfers. So tell your sheriff, I'm not going to do it, and that I will be glad for you to terminate me because I just can't do an inhumane thing like this. Sorry, not going to happen.
Very bizarre to me. Let's move over to a quickie from the Dallas News. Larry, look, man, the prison system or the jail system in Dallas County is going to lose $3 million in revenue because the commissioner approved a new contract on Tuesday with Securus, and they're going to drop the cost of a phone call from $3.60 for a 15-minute call. It will only cost 18 cents. And this has got to be like making everyone's hackles go up because, like, well, we're going to lose $3 million a year. Where are we now going to get the money to run, to offset the expenses of having a jail? So if this is jail, I believe, then these people have a presumption of innocence. So why are we putting the screws to them to keep in touch with family, talk to their employers? I don't get this. This seems to be something that the city and the county and the state should bear the burden of providing a modicum of normalcy while you're being detained.
Well, you're missing an important part of the equation. The companies that provide these phone systems are wanting to make as much money as they can. And one of the temptations that they've offered for being allowed access to provide the phone service is a cut of the action. And that's very tempting for jail administrators and for prison administrators to turn down. You're looking for ways, again, as I've said on this podcast many times, when you run for public office, when you find a person that says, "I tell you what I'm going to do, if y'all elect me, I'm going to see if I can get a whole lot more money pumped into our correctional system." When you can play me a clip like that, somebody send me one, we'll put it on the podcast as quickly as possible, because that doesn't sell with all the competing things that governments need to fund, that people want funded, although they hate the government, but they want these things funded. And so this is a $2.5 million money revenue stream that's going to evaporate. And the county's going to have to look for another source of that revenue, or they're going to have to divert funding for something else. But the article identifies that 70% of the people are pretrial in Dallas County Jail. And that's typical of what you'd expect. And the rest of them are serving sentences that are either waiting transport to a state facility, or they're serving a misdemeanor level sentence. They're never going to be transferred, but they're going to serve it out in the county jail. But regardless of whether they're serving time or whether they're pretrial, I don't think we should exploit them for, how much did it say per phone call?
It was $3.60, which to me is like super affordable, down to 18 cents. I've experienced, I guess, we could say that these are in-state calls, but I don't know if that's true or not. But my experience was $25 for 15 minutes. So $3.60 would be a huge, like, wow, that's cheap. But 18 cents, I would stay on the phone all freaking day.
So, but yeah, this is good news for the inmates of Dallas County Jail.
Definitely that. So yeah, I just wanted to bounce there real quick. The next article that we have is from WFYI, Indianapolis. Growing number of people question electronic monitoring system. I think, Larry, because we have all of this amazing technology, that we could almost shut down prison and jail and put some sort of digital device around someone and send them all home. And we're just done with it.
Well, if we could do that, that would be fantastic. But that's not the reality of what electronic monitoring tends to be. Electronic monitoring tends to expand the universe of people who are under correctional control. And it tends to be an augmentation of standard probation supervision, which is largely a relic of the past, because there's when you run into supervised people, start taking a tally of who's under electronic monitoring, and you'll find a significant number of people that are under probation supervision or being electronically monitored. So, but we're not diverting very many people from prison with the use of electronic technology. It's an additional group of offenders that we're bringing in, particularly on the pretrial side. Everybody on pretrial is now under electronic monitoring. Really? They're presumed innocent.
But doesn't the technology do a better job than your own recognizance?
Well, it depends on what a better job means. If it means prying into the person's life and knowing every detail of what they're doing and restricting their mobility, yes, it would absolutely do better than that. But if the pretrial is merely for the purpose of assuring the participation in the process, then it does a horrible job, because it puts so many barriers around the person that they shouldn't be. They're still innocent, remember?
I thought we were guilty until proven innocent in this country.
Well, we're moving that direction, but why shouldn't you be able to leave Houston County when you're pretrial? Why would that barrier be on you? You're innocent, remember? Why would you have a curfew? Why would you have a drinking restriction that you can't go to bars and stuff? You're pretrial, remember?
Mm-hmm. Do you think that this impacts different classes of people, be it race, ethnicities, economic backgrounds? Does it impact them in a disproportionate way?
It does, because in most instances there's a cost associated with it, and the people who are least able to afford it end up in some sort of violation, or they don't have the option for pretrial release because they can't pay for that fancy monitoring. So it does.
So you can go home if you can pay us the $100 a month for you to have the ankle monitor on.
Yeah, which is usually more than that. But if you can pay the fee for this thing, you could be out of jail pretrial.
And as we experienced at the meeting in Georgia several months ago, there was a guy there. I totally didn't even realize he was on an ankle monitor. So he had to sit near an outlet so he could charge his little ankle bracelet. And what is it? What do you think that does for you having to continue your employment if you have to sit near an outlet to charge your little box?
Well, it does that. It limits people's mobility for employment because they have so many hours before they have to get to a charger, and if you're out and doing field work, you don't really have a charger really available, and so it creates all sorts of issues with employment, and it certainly interferes with your personal life. Very few people feel the liberty to go to the gym and work out, and to take a dip in the pool or anything like that with these monitors on.
Definitely that.
Ready to be a part of Registry Matters? Get links at registrymatters.co. If you need to be all discreet about it, contact them by email, registrymatterscast@gmail.com. You can call or text a ransom message to 747-227-4477. Want to support Registry Matters on a monthly basis? Head to patreon.com/registrymatters. Not ready to become a patron? Give a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Or tell your buddies at your treatment class about the podcast. We want to send out a big heartfelt support for those on the registry. Keep fighting. Without you, we can't succeed. You make it possible.
Let's see, where are we here? We have an article from The Intercept. This is a couple articles that we have bound together. It says, will Tennessee kill a man who saved lives on death row? My reading of this is this guy is named Nicholas Sutton, and regardless of the crime that he committed, I'm not even trying to go down that path. If he was sentenced to death row, then I'm going to assume he did something pretty severe. But his time in prison, it looks like he had decided to turn his life around. He was helping other people, like almost being like a ward. Is that the right word I'm looking for? Someone that helps people with medical challenges. There's a guy with cerebral palsy. He would like carry him to visitation so he could see his family. And anyway, so what did we decide to do with this guy?
Well, unfortunately, he was executed.
All right. And this is coming out of what state? This is Nashville. So this Tennessee is where this happened.
Yes, he
the
lost
governor apparently ran on a platform of prison reform?
That is correct. And he's a born-again Christian.
Oh, all right then. And born-again Christian, I'm thinking that we would have some sort of idea of forgiveness and so forth?
Well, I can't speak much for born-again Christians, but I can tell you that when I've tried to have them square that, those I've discussed it with, they go to the eye for eye and tooth for tooth. They tell me that somewhere in the Bible there's that eye for an eye, and that he did his thing, so therefore this is his eye and eye for tooth. And they square that up with the forgiveness. But this Governor Bill Lee did deny a clemency bid. The Supreme Court, which the Supreme Court hardly ever intervenes on a death penalty case anymore. So he was in fact executed. But it says he saved the life of a prison guard. So Sutton is credited with saving the lives of multiple correctional officers, according to the clemency application the defense lawyer Kevin Sharp sent to the governor in January. One of these officers, Tony Eden, says Sutton saved his life during a prison riot in 1985. A group of inmates, 5 inmates armed with knives and other weapons, surrounded me and attempted to take me hostage. Nick and another inmate confronted them, physically removed me from the situation, and escorted me to safety of the trap gate in another building. So it seems like that those things would have been considered.
He had been in prison for like almost 40 years, Larry.
Yes, and I would dare say that his age, I mean, he said he was 58, so he was probably beyond the criminality. Yeah. And nobody was talking about letting him loose. That wasn't
right.
They were talking about a commutation from death by lethal injection, I think is the way they did it, or whatever method. I think he chose, maybe he chose another method, but it was about commuting him so he would die in prison. Those were the options. No one was talking about letting him go teach Sunday school in the free world.
So America has the best and most compassionate judicial system on the planet?
So, yes, we do. But apparently, toward the bottom of the article in CNN, it says some of his victims want his life spared. Charles Maynard remembers going camping with, well, it's too much to read, but the people can read the article. But apparently he chose the electric chair, but there were some victims who wanted his life spared.
And I'm wondering, just to take the Marsy's Law, that approach, do you think that they would then consider someone trying to be compassionate to the person that committed their crime? Or do you or would they only look for those?
Oddly enough, it doesn't work that way as often.
So it only works in the negative.
Yes, oddly enough, when the victim comes in wanting extreme leniency, they said, "Well, we have to send a message to deter others, and this is, we appreciate your." But seldom does the leniency come down. If that
sounds like hypocrisy, Larry.
It does indeed.
So from the Marshall Project, Mississippi prisons, no one's safe, not even the guards. I got to think that this is on the heels of the Parchment thing where the riot broke out. I don't think guards are safe pretty much at any prison, to be honest with you. It is incredibly plausible that when a guard walks in, that the 80 people in the room would just jump them. And that's the end of that story. Then they'd have keys and so forth, and potentially other things that they could then gain access to. And you could have a riot and do pretty big damage quickly. quickly.
You're correct. The former Secretary of Corrections for our state, Greg Marcantel, was fond of testifying. He was asked to testify, but when he was asked to testify in legislative hearings, he was fond of reminding legislators that the inmates consent to being controlled. And
Yes.
one way that you keep order is you treat them with fairness and with consistency, and they have to believe that they're receiving fair treatment. And at any given time, inmates can take over the asylum if they want to. How long they would be in control of it depends on a number of factors that how quickly an institution can respond, and what their internal processes are in terms of retaking the prison. But at any given time, inmates can take control of a housing unit or
Yes.
any part of a facility if they chose to.
Right. And then you just sort of wait them out, and that's why there are like vents in the ceiling to where they can drop in tear gas canisters, etc. It seems like, I don't think anybody's going to like mass open up the doors and let 3,000 people out of a big prison. That seems like that would be a hard task to achieve.
So, but in Mississippi, that's a particularly acute because of the number of 10 prisoners that have been murdered or died by suicide since Christmas, which was not that long ago. And, their system is in chaos. If you look at the chart on the staffing, they have.
I was just about to go there.
The Mississippi vacancy rate is alarmingly high. But of course, if you don't pay anybody anything, it's not the type of job that has a lot of attraction to it, particularly in a strong economy.
Should these people want to go and donate their time to prisons to try and mentor these young individuals, and potentially not so young, and try and have them come out of there a better equipped individual? They should go there on their own time and be compassionate that way.
Well, wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be fantastic? well, let's look at the salaries on this of what the starting salary for guards in Mississippi is $25,000, and officers in the privately run prisons are at $23,000. Other states that don't have the acute problems pay more, as much as $58,000 in Massachusetts. And so if you've got Mississippi paying half, I mean, what are you going to get for $23,000? Not a whole lot.
Yeah, that's like $12 or $13 an hour.
So okay, but yes, the Mississippi prisons are going to explode at some point. It's a long article. People should read it.
Oh yeah, certainly. But they have 50% vacancy. That's insane.
Yeah, so, which would mean that you would have a lot of officers pulling double shifts.
Yes.
Which would also bring down their performance level. If you're working double shifts repeatedly, you can't be at your best because you're exhausted.
Also seems like that would be a rife opportunity for guards to make a few extra bucks by bringing in contraband.
Well, that's exactly what they're having. That's where all those phones and all the contraband's getting in Mississippi prisons. But if you look on that chart, Alabama has an even higher vacancy rate.
Yes. Doesn't really surprise me that almost everything is in the South. Just doesn't really surprise me.
Well, yeah, look at the states with the highest vacancy rate: Alabama, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Kentucky. And then we're right up there, number 5, with 24% vacancy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think there could be, I always point this out and you always like thump me for saying it. Is there a team red, team blue issue here against the state controlled level, not federal, but for state control, team red, team blue? It looks like team red has the high vacancies generally.
Well, I don't see the teams the way you see them. I see it more in terms of conservative versus liberal. Now that properly translates mostly these days to team red and team blue, but there was a time at my age, I remember when there wasn't such a polarization between the parties. You had liberal Republicans and you had very conservative Democrats. The South tends to be very conservative. So therefore, I'm looking at the conservative ideology. That's the problem when it comes to this particular issue. The conservatives do not want to spend any money on prisons, and they want to extort as much as they can from the inmates to help offset the cost of incarceration. And they want to incarcerate as many people as they can because they're big on punishment. I don't see it as a team red, team blue. I see it as conservative versus liberal. Now, the conservatives eventually sometimes come to their senses when they finally drive the cost of corrections so high that it begins to offset and consume projects they would rather be spending money on. They will eventually say, well, I guess we're going to have to look at somebody to contain and control prison costs. But that comes usually after they reach these alarming situations like you have in Mississippi, which you have in Alabama, and you have all over the South.
I do see Team Red and Team Blue just as shorthand for conservative versus progressive policies.
So, well, I'm dreaming for the day when we'll actually won't have so much polarization, that conservatives will be welcome in the Democratic Party, which they're not right now, and liberals will be welcome in the Republican Party, as they are not currently, but they used to be. Back in the civil rights days, we had a lot of moderate liberal Republicans. So I could just rattle off a plethora of them of people who were liberal, and still, like to this very day, you'll be talking to someone like Cindy up in Connecticut, and she'll say the Republicans did this. I said, remember, you guys, the Republican Party in Connecticut was a lot more liberal. You had Governor Lowell Weicker, Senator Lowell Weicker. Senator Lowell Weicker was a very liberal Republican. Senator Lowell Weicker would never get elected as a Republican today. That's how much the parties have changed.
I do understand. Yeah, and then there's nobody in the middle. There's no, like you were just describing, left-leaning right people and right-leaning left people. There's nobody in the middle. Everyone is so far stuck against the walls on both sides. It's a very disturbing place that we are.
So, in fact, Ronald Reagan picked a liberal Republican named Richard Schweiker to be his vice presidential nominee in 1976 when he was trying to unseat President Ford for the nomination. And but try to find a liberal Republican today. They're very, very hard to find.
Definitely that. Shall we go talk about? Did he get his sentence actually? He got exonerated, correct, or just released? How did that go down?
He got commuted.
So I believe this is President Trump commuted Mr. Blagojevich. What an amazing name that is, by the way.
That is a fantastic name.
It is.
For you to come back and call bigots my admirers is a farce. It's an act of hypocrisy. It's a terrible way to treat a guest on your show, and you know it.
And you sent me a clip from Anderson Cooper from CNN, and I know everyone's going to hate me, hate us for playing something from CNN because that's like the king of fake news. But here's Anderson Cooper challenging Mr. Blagojevich, Rod Blagojevich, on his exoneration track record, I guess is the best way to put that.
Maybe you'll join me in the fight to reform our criminal justice system and actually do something about the problem of over-sentencing blacks and Latinos.
Right.
I learned that when I was there.
Okay. What's sad is that you hadn't actually learned that when you mattered, when you actually were the governor. You talk about working for the criminal justice reform. There's a lot of people in Chicago, there's a lot of people in Illinois who actually spit up when you say that. Because when you were actually in power and when you were actually governor and you could have helped thousands of people with clemency cases, you blew it off. The governor after you inherited a huge backlog, nearly 3,000 clemency petitions that you failed to review. In fact, you were sued as governor by Cabrini Green Legal Aid to try and pressure you to actually pay attention to clemency cases instead of extorting people for money and campaign contributions. So it's a little ironic and frankly a little sad and pathetic and hypocritical, you talking about commuting, you get a commutation of a sentence, which is within the president's right, but you ignored a whole hell of a lot of other people who are hoping you might give them clemency when you actually mattered. So actually, you know what?
Question,
I'm happy to. There wasn't a question; it was a statement. I'd be happy to work with people on criminal justice reform, but I wouldn't work with you.
Okay, can I answer that statement and question? Okay, I'd like to address that. Look. When you've been put where I was and you have all the time that I was given to think and look back on some of the things you might have done different, that's certainly an area that you talked about that I certainly wish I would have done more on. There's no question about that. That's among my biggest regrets. I didn't know how corrupt the criminal justice system was until it did it to me. And that was a wake-up call.
Can I start with this one, Larry?
Sure.
I have to think that a person that is vying for the executive position, the top office of a state, would have people advising him on how shitty prison actually is, that he would go, oh my God, I didn't realize how bad it was until I was in there. Yet he had all of the power in the world to make them less shitty. the governor of Georgia, I believe it was the 80s or 90s, he took out all of the recreational facilities pretty much out of prison and just said, hey, you guys are just going to hang out here in cold warehouses. F you. They have an immense amount of control over how the system would be. And these would be the enlightened folks over how that system is. And here he is. He's going to then go, oh, whoops, I didn't know until I was there. That is really bothersome.
Well, I'm not quite as harsh as you are. I think it's very plausible that he could. Corrections, again, is not a high priority for executives around the country. When you're running for governor, if anybody can send a clip that says, if you elect me governor, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. We're going to have the best corrections facilities. It just isn't. There's so many things that state governments do that actually are very appealing to voters, but making life better for prisoners is not very appealing to voters. Making prisons, anything that we talk about doing to reform prisons is going to cost money. And people like to talk about it's going to save money. Ultimately, it might save money if we reduce the cost of the population in prisons by half, if we bought both those facilities. But if we start giving people more training and education, that costs money to run those programs while they're in prison. If we start mentorship programs, those things cost money. If we start providing more reentry services and financial aid to help people reintegrate, that costs money. All this stuff is not free, and you're competing with all the other things that are popular with government. So a candidate running for governor is not going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's wrong with the prison system. That candidate is going to deal with prisons as minimally as they have to get by, which is what Rod did during his tenure. He put it out of sight, out of mind, and hoped that there weren't any large-scale riots, and we do the minimum we have to do. But I think the bigger question that I would like to see here is the president. As Anderson pointed out, the president has the right to do that. And that is, every challenge on the president's pardons have been turned back. And I tell people it's an absolute. The president can pardon and commute. The question is the president serious about criminal justice reform? I think that's a legitimate question. We look at the track record of his executive clemency. There certainly has been a lot of high-profile people of his 117 or so that we've heard a lot about, including Joe Arpaio. And we hear possibilities that he might pardon Stone or do something on that case.
Or Manafort or Flynn.
But what we don't hear from the president, and I find it extremely disappointing, he did sign the watered-down First Step Act, and Jared Kushner helped push that to the finish line over conservative opposition led by Senator Tom Cotton in Arkansas. So we end up with a much neutered First Step Act. He did sign that to his credit. But, Mr. President, what are you going to do about the directives that your Department of Justice gave out to seek the maximum level of criminal charges against people, to charge for the maximum possible crime? Are you going to rescind that, Mr. President? Are you going to rescind the policy that says to seek all the habitual enhancements that you can? Are you going to rescind those policies? Are you going to really be serious about criminal justice reform, or is this window dressing? I think those are legitimate questions about this. And then in terms of your executive clemency, President Carter used his executive clemency to over 200,000 people. Now, 200,000 were draft evaders who had left the United States to go to Canada, and then he did thousands more. I don't know the exact totals, but he took an immense amount of political heat and criticism, which that could have been a factor in his not being reelected. So, Mr. President, you're very popular right now. Mr. President, let's open up these gates and let's get a lot of these people out of prison who have served more than enough time, and let's start using that executive clemency while you still have the popularity to do it. Don't do like Governor Blagojevich did. Don't ignore everybody, and let's reverse some of these misguided policies that your Attorney General has ordered the Department of Justice to seek. That's what I'd like to see.
I hear you, and I'm getting comments in the chat that you need to tweet at him, Larry.
Well,
you need to step up on Twitter and go have a battle with the president, who has we almost have the same number of Twitter followers as he does. He has 50-something million, so we're like right there in second place.
We're at 48 million, right?
It's somewhere. It's just shy of that, actually. Just shy of that.
Okay. Right.
You could actually audibly hear Mr. Cooper in that whole clip. He was like getting worked up to where he was not able to communicate in a very smooth fashion. He was starting to stutter and stammer. He was totally getting worked up while he was talking to Mr. Blagojevich.
He was indeed, and I think that's the ultimate of hypocrisy for the former governor to benefit from executive action. And then the article points out above, the article that we're not going to spend a lot of time on, but he was totally tone deaf to anybody who was suffering until it became him. And that's often the problem in this entire movement that we're facing, is most of us were all in favor of all this stuff that we're now against because it impacted us.
Correct. Well, I'm not going to sit there and say that it wasn't me. I was certainly that way too. I do recall me specifically. I was driving when I was in the military. We were driving across the country, and we passed by something. It must have been in Texas, but it could have been in like one of those neighboring states. And I saw a literal chain gang going on with people like shackled and like were like hoeing crops or something like that. And I was like, right on, man, bread and water, make them work. That was me. 15 years ago, I guess, 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
Well, and then when they put you on the chain gang, how did you feel about it?
I had a little bit different of an opinion of it at that point, because Georgia's a little bit warm and summer times are uncomfortable.
I see. All right. Well, I can't wait. I can't wait for what's coming next. Now, we have not done Justice Scalia in a long time, for several episodes. And just want people to know that we pick clips from him that we think will help understand the role of the federal government, the state government, separation of powers, what the Constitution can do for us. And we get so many questions about something in particular in terms of the Facebook and the social media about why isn't it unconstitutional. So I'm hoping that this clip, after I dissect it, will help explain that.
Beautiful. Beautiful setup. Here we go.
But does equal protection mean that you have to have unisex toilets? I mean, that's the kind of question you have to get into.
This is your quote, Mr. Justice, in California. Certainly, the Constitution does not require discrimination on the basis of sex. The only issue is whether it prohibits it. It doesn't. Nobody ever thought that's what it meant. Nobody ever voted for that. If the current society wants to outlaw discrimination by sex, hey, we have things called legislatures, and they enact things called laws. So why doesn't the 14th Amendment then cover women?
The 14th Amendment, Senator, does not apply to private discrimination. I was speaking of Title VII and laws that prohibit private discrimination. The 14th Amendment says nothing about private discrimination, only discrimination by government.
This goes to questions that we've received all of the time. That's like, why can't I be on Facebook? And I thought like we could go talk about Packingham for a brief moment, that said that so-and-so North Carolina had a prohibition on all people being on social media. And that is the example that he is describing there. That is the state restricting you from using the platform, not the platform restricting you from the platform.
That is correct. And that's why I thought this clip was ideal for helping to explain that. We have question after question about discrimination and what the Constitution protects. And the Constitution wasn't thinking, the founding framers weren't thinking so much in terms of discrimination and abuses by individuals against other individuals. They were thinking about limitations on the power of what government could do. And so when you look at Brown versus Board of Education, that was the government that was running the two separate school systems. And it was the government who was giving the African-American children an inferior education and calling it equal. Therefore, the government was stopped from doing that in Brown versus Board of Education. But when you have private discrimination, then you need statutory law. And you have, like there was a time when people could discriminate in terms of housing before we had the Fair Housing Act. But as Scalia said, we have legislatures and they pass things called laws. So if you find discrimination objectionable, and it's not the government doing it, then you need to pass something called a law. And you did we have fair housing. We have the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's a statute. That's not in the Constitution anywhere. You don't have an ADA clause in the U.S. Constitution. You have Americans with Disabilities Act. You have the Voting Rights Act. But you don't. If you adhere to the conservative doctrine about the limitations of government, you would not want the Constitution to provide a broader interpretation of the protections there. If you don't like what Facebook is doing or not doing, then we need to pass a statutory law that says that social media, as defined by whatever, and I'm not an expert on social media, shall not prohibit users from using this mechanism of communication if they reach a certain segment of the population, which would be defined. And then we would have something that would protect people. But it seems like a lot of our people want to invent a right that's not in the Constitution to prohibit discrimination, to say that they have the right to use a platform that they don't own, which would be the same as going into knocking today, Sunday morning. I should have gone into the local synagogue, knocked and said, I have a message I'd like to deliver, and I have a right to do that. I have something to say. Give me your microphone. Let me speak my piece. I have no right to their microphone. It's their microphone. It's their platform.
I would point out that if you were there on Sunday, there probably wasn't anybody there. There
probably wouldn't be in that particular, but in the terms of the Protestant, churches, there would be a whole lot of people there this morning. But you have no right to go in and demand to use their communications, their platform. You have the right to speak, but you don't have the right to be heard. You can speak all you want to in the arena that you control, but you can't demand to have someone else provide you their platform for your message.
Absolutely. I don't think I have anything else that I can say about that one. He's pretty.
I hope that helps.
I just wonder. Let's see. How do I want to word this? He seems incredibly rational in the way that he words these things. That if we want to change, and I think we were talking about this pre-show, if we wanted to change to mandate, I guess that Facebook, etc., would allow our people, then we can enact laws with our representatives that says, Facebook, you can't discriminate. And so my question to you by extension is, I know that we have places that have presence restrictions, but generally speaking, you are allowed to go to a McDonald's. I think McDonald's can prevent you from going into their establishment for their own personal reasons. What do we don't have a guarantee that you can go to Walmart or any of these things because they're public they're privately held companies using the public space. But could they say that you can't go visit the Washington Monument in DC because that's public property?
And there's where it gets a little dicier.
Is that a comparison?
That's where it gets a little dicier, and that's an area of case law that needs to develop in terms of the government prohibiting people who have paid taxes to support these services from accessing these services is a different question than what McDonald's does. But see, McDonald's falls under the public accommodations. We've passed laws, statutory laws, in terms of public accommodations to stop the discrimination in housing, hotel rooms renting, and people like Lester Maddox, who used to at one time would not serve blacks in his restaurant in the Pickwick in Atlanta. But we... What's so funny about the Pickwick?
Hang on, man. I got to play this right now.
Hypocrisy is...
Hypocrisy. So what was the name of this restaurant?
The Pickwick.
All right, go on. Sorry.
Well, in response to people like Lester Maddox, there's been statutes put on the books that when you're accommodating the public, that you cannot discriminate on the basis of the prohibited factors, and I can't recite all of them. But you could possibly do that with social media. You'd have to define what the limitations are in terms of the discrimination that could be employed. But even with those accommodations, restaurants are allowed to have standards in terms of attire and who they will serve. If you're intoxicated, they can still tell people we won't serve you, but it's not on the basis of race. You can't tell somebody we won't serve you because we don't serve your kind. But you can tell a person you're intoxicated and we do not serve your kind, and you're fine.
Right. Yeah, that So we could make similar parallels to a McDonald's using the roads that were built by taxpayer dollars. Obviously, people aren't going to go to McDonald's if it's in the middle of the desert somewhere there's no road access. So the internet itself would be the public access infrastructure for you to get to Facebook. I mean, they do call it the internet, the superhighway, whatever, the digital superhighway. So that seems to make a fair comparison. So then how does Facebook get away with discriminating against a certain class of people? Not in the same way, or in contrast to how McDonald's cannot do it.
Well, for two reasons. One is there hasn't been a law passed that says they can't, like there has for McDonald's. Okay. And two, there hasn't been a legal challenge. We first have to pass the statutory law that says you cannot deny this accommodation to everybody, like we did with to keep people like Lester Maddox from saying, I won't serve blacks. So we have to pass the law. And then we have to do some litigation. And even if we don't pass a law, we would have to do some litigation and put forth some creative theories about how this is publicly. I'm not anywhere near sophisticated enough to explain how much of the internet is publicly paid for. I don't know enough about how we got to where we are with the internet to know how much of it was paid for by the public. But there could be arguments made. It's just litigation that hasn't happened.
I think a lot of it is privately paid for, but I think a ton of it is publicly at least designed and paid for as well. But still, you have just, I don't know, even if it were privately paid for, it's a conglomeration of a bunch of companies that have built it. And are you saying, are we then saying that all of them agree to block these people from that place?
Well, they were put under pressure from the government. So let's be clear. The Facebook initially wanted to have open access to everyone. But the public outcry resulted in government pressure to close the network to these individuals. So we, in a sense, we do have government interference already.
I can agree with that. I can understand where you're going with that.
Yes. Well, it's an undeveloped area of litigation. I would like to see more litigation. Again, it gets back to what I said last week when we lost half of our listeners, when I said funding is the biggest thing that stands in the way of more litigation.
Yes.
When I said, hey, rather than just giving out of boys, we've got to give out of dollars, and out of dollars will allow more litigation to ensue. It's very, very expensive, and it takes a long time. Look at this Michigan case; it's been dragging on for how many years now?
4-ish or something, and $2.5 or something $million.
So it's the absence of money that causes lots of things that should be challenged not to be challenged.
So everyone go donate money to your nearest whatever, ACLU, NARSOL affiliate, whatever that is, go donate all of the money. That way we can make all of the challenges. Because attorneys generally don't work for free, last I checked, but maybe some of them do. Maybe some of them are willing to do something that's a pro bono-ish thing.
They do a lot of pro bono work for free, but these are long, drawn-out things. It's one thing to help on an issue that's going to be able to be resolved quickly. You can draft a letter. You can make a call to someone at a governmental agency. You can try to break a logjam. But you're talking about litigation that drags on for years and devours your practice. That's a whole different. It's a whole different equation. I guess it would be the example to rebuilding a fleet of vehicles for somebody versus helping a lady who's got a broken fan belt on her. What do you call it? The serpentine belt. Okay. Not too many mechanics would object to giving the older lady the serpentine belt if she couldn't pay for it and putting it on for her, but they wouldn't want to do a fleet of vehicles. It would take them for the next 5 years to rehab all those vehicles. That's the analogy.
Did you see the movie Erin Brockovich?
I did, yes.
Oh, whoa! Hang on, wait a minute. I need to take a minute. You have seen a movie?
I saw that movie, yes.
Wow. Okay. Well, and I'm just bringing this up because it was a super small law firm that then eventually went to bat and took on the big company, and how much of that time and energy of that little firm was devoured by trying to sue the big company. It was a great movie regardless, but that's anyway, I just wanted to bring up that comparison. So go watch that movie to get something along those lines of a comparison.
Good movie. Yes.
Wow. You've seen a movie? I'm stunned. A person in chat from New York who has a very British accent sent me this article. It's from the Daily Mail at the co.uk. And a married mother of 2, teacher, 33, avoids jail time after pleading guilty to having sex with 2 students aged 16 and 18. Don't want to cover the crime. I want to cover the punishment. She is receiving 5 years of probation and a $2,500 fine for each crime. So she's getting 10 probation and $5,000 in fines. Oh, she's also going to give up her teaching license, Larry. I'm pretty sure if we would have reversed the roles, make it a 30-something-year-old male teacher and some later teen and middle teen females for students, this person would be going to jail for forever. And this would be shunned and admonished and all of that for all of the days to come. But somehow, I don't think that's fair. Not that she's getting a harsh sentence, but just not a fair sentence compared to reversing the genders.
I would agree. There does tend to be more tolerance for if it's the other way around. I think you're seeing some prosecutors take a different view and they're going after more significant sentences against the women. I don't think going after more harsh sentences against the women is the answer. I think probably coming to our senses on the guys is the answer. You know, if these people are old enough, like one of these boys is 18, well, that's the age of consent in every state in this country, in the U.S. And there are a few exceptions where if they have an authoritative role over them, that it's still unlawful. But I struggle with these things where we losing a teaching license is, yes, they clearly can't resist the temptation of being around the young students, but putting them in a correctional setting or a criminal conviction, I think it's just a little too much.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. And, you know, I can come up with all kinds of like unethical, you know, poor decision, but I still struggle with like the criminal part. So if she was 33 and the student was 18, I understand the hierarchy there, the authority thing being immoral, unethical, but I still deeply, deeply struggle with that. That is actually criminal. Maybe like even the 16-year-old probably is past the age of consent, depending on the state.
In most states, yes, except for the authority relationship, and theoretically, when you have authority,
it criminal. That's so hard for me to swallow that it's criminal.
Well, it adds a dimension to it, and again, I don't know that we should throw the book at these people, but clearly, if you misuse your authority, when I was in property management, I had an awful lot of authority that I could misuse if I chose to. But that reflects who you are in terms of if you don't respect your tenants enough to give them notice that you're going to come in, that doesn't translate into a crime per se. It translates to a creepy person who shouldn't be in property management. On the other hand, if you put when the apartment's vacant, if you put sneaky cameras and observe the person, that does translate to criminality. So I don't know that everything that just because something's creepy should be criminal. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that maybe this teacher, losing her license might have been sufficient punishment.
Certainly, that you certainly have eliminated the challenge of the temptation, mostly of the temptation of her being in a room full of fresh young men that she can quote unquote prey upon. I mean, it certainly removes that from that situation. I mean, that's all that they're really trying to do, I guess.
So, but we just have to punish. We have to send this message.
Right. All right. Then we are going to move over quickly to an article that is actually sourced from narsal.org. Narsal condemns Southern Baptist Convention as unchristian. And here's my little quick synopsis here that's going on. So there's a church in Texas that has hired a pastor who is one of our people, and the Southern Baptist Convention has voted to expel the church, the Ranchland Heights Baptist Church of Midland, for employing Reverend Philip Rutledge as its pastor. Why is this such a big deal? Can't they pick and choose who they want in their convention?
Well, I'm never professed to be an expert on the governance of the Southern Baptist Convention, but what I do think I understand about it is they proclaim that they are about. They have their doctrinal teachings that if you're a Southern Baptist, you believe in this, but then they delegate everything in terms of the administration of the congregation to the local control. And unlike the Methodist Church, United Methodist Church, where the bishop of the conference would assign you a pastor at the Southern Baptist Convention, the congregation issues its own call for its pastor and for its personnel. And I find it odd that although they proclaim they believe in local autonomy, that they're going to expel this church from the convention for doing exactly what they proclaim that they believe in, which is autonomy. They called a person to be their minister who has fallen short of the glory of God. And they have forgiven him, which is part of their doctrinal teachings. And this person is apparently, by all accounts, doing a decent job or a good job. And the Southern Baptist Convention has all of a sudden done an about-face and decided that they'll just, since they can't exert any control over the local congregation's decision to call him, they'll just kick them out of they won't be a Southern Baptist affiliated church anymore. Isn't that fits into that hypocrisy, doesn't it?
I think that does fit the hypocrisy. They say that all of the church, the congregation, they all know about it and they support him being the dude in charge of things. I don't quite understand why they would then try to kick the whole church out. That does seem like hypocrisy in the biggest of ways.
It does indeed. It's gotten quite a few comments on the NARSO website from people. I haven't read them all, but it certainly
only 46.
Well, that's a high for articles that we post when we get that many comments. That's on the high side. So
I'm looking through some of them, and like somebody says that they were kicked out. It's not just Baptist churches that are a problem. You know, the list goes on where people are saying things about them being kicked out of their church as well. But that's another subject.
That's not the point we're making with this.
Of course,
we're making the point of the Southern Baptist. They proclaim their belief in independent local control. It's like a person who goes out and campaigns about being big about preventing sexual exploitation of children, then come to find out that their phone is loaded with child porn. That's the point we're making. We're not making the point that there's that the churches don't do bad things to people who have fallen short. But the Southern Baptists claim that they believe in autonomy. That's the point we're making.
Absolutely. Well, there you go. More of that hypocrisy. Let's see, how did we decide we were going to spell that? So hypocrisy is hypocrisy. So how do we spell hypocrisy?
I don't know how to spell that. We'd have to ask somebody from Georgia.
How about we start with H-I-I, hypocrisy. So there you go, hypocrisy.
You people or something else.
Right up your alley, Larry. The final article that we have tonight is Indiana bill could result in kids being sent to jail younger and for more crimes. This is from the South Bend Tribune. I guess that is the state of Indiana, I believe. South Bend, isn't that where Buttigieg is from?
That is correct.
Hey, how about that? I actually know a thing or two. This is when they were 12, I think did we get any lower than 12?
It's disgusting.
So we're gonna put 12-year-olds in like adult people prison. Is that what this is?
I didn't read the bill. I found it so revolting, just a story. But Senator Aaron Hutchin, Republican of Salem, would allow courts to sentence children as young as 12 to the Department of Correction and expands the list of crimes that could send a child to jail to include an attempt to commit murder, rape, kidnapping, and armed robbery. The bill also increases maximum sentence to juveniles. And I'm just wondering, what's going on in Indiana? Where's the public opposition this passed overwhelmingly? At least one house of the legislature, according to this story of what I'm trying to find the count, but they had the vote total down there. It was an overwhelming. This is some of your famous bipartisanship at work. My famous bipartisanship. Well, you always blame me for bipartisanship. Well, you always tout the benefits of bipartisanship. Can I get a you people? Yep, you people do that. We people. Hang on, I got one for you here too, Larry. You people. Who said that again? That's Eisenhower. Yep, you people. Let's hear it again. I can do that. I can play it again. You people. That's the earliest quip that we can find, so we need to get that attributed to the first person to use the expression "you people." Yeah, that was from interview 1967. Okay, you barely time to actually have recordings of things. Yeah, that's amazing that they have a recording device in 1967. So we got people that are going to be like playing doctor with their neighbor and whatnot, and then we're going to like go put them in prison and the registry at the age of 12-ish or something like that. Well, apparently, if you're a Hoosier, yes. Wow, that is that's pretty impressive. Is this a race to the bottom, Larry? Is this a race to see which can be the shittiest state? I remember that was said during the Obama administration, and nobody liked that terminology. But yes, this is definitely a race to the bottom.
Wow. And so then the next state over to Indiana is going to then go, aha, well, they've got 12-year-olds. We're going to go for 11s?
Well, I can't even fathom this. I can't. This is so bizarre.
All right, then. Well, with that, Larry, I think we should shut this MF down.
Well, on that, back to that Scalia clip that we played before we shut down. What, for those who will not actually watch it, that was Senator Diane Feinstein from California that was speaking, and the late Justice Scalia. But the quote that Feinstein read to him was one we've actually played on this podcast.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, they have legislatures and people they enact things called laws. We've actually played that on this podcast. But for just put it in context, that was Scalia educating Feinstein about the Constitution doesn't protect and prevent private discrimination. We need laws to do that. The founders were protected from government action, not private action.
I do understand, and that, Larry, seriously, it's not hard to separate out, but it's hard to separate out. It's hard to make the distinction between what the state is doing versus what a local individual business owner, whatever, is doing.
Well, we're going to have to try harder.
Larry, what is the way to find the podcast? If someone is interested in finding, listening, subscribing, all that stuff, where do they go? Well,
there's a number of ways, but the best way to do it is to go to registrymatters.co. You can find all kind of good stuff about us.
All the navigation links are there for you to find phone numbers, email links, etc. How about if someone wants to send a phone call message in, just like our super patron Mike did, where do they go for that?
Yes, he saved the phone line for another couple of weeks. 747-227-4477.
And how about sending us an email message? Where would they go for that?
That would go to registrymatterscast@gmail.com.
And we love all of our patrons very much. But if you would like to become a patron and support all of our efforts in doing this podcast every week and all of the super incredible knowledge that Larry bestows upon us with great generosity, where do they go to do that?
That would be patreon.com/registrymatters. And if you don't remember the slash, just search on Patreon and you'll see it. Look for Registry Matters and it'll take you right to us.
That is perfect. You can find us on Twitter at Registry Matters. Also, you can find us at YouTube. You can search for our podcast on all of the platforms, whether that's Pocket Cast or iTunes or Google Podcasts, all the places. Search for Registry Matters and you will find us there. Larry, I don't have anything else. Do you have anything else before we go?
I think we've done a great job. So Charles, looks like Brenda's there muted. And,
yep, she is.
And Craig, thank you, Craig, for being here.
Thank you, Craig, as always. Larry, I hope you have a great Sunday afternoon, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks.